In a lush and verdant vineyard, where the sun bathed the earth in a warm, golden glow, a cunning and clever fox was on the prowl. This vineyard was renowned for its bountiful grapevines, each adorned with clusters of ripe, juicy grapes that glistened like jewels. The fox, whose keen eyes missed nothing, was wandering through the vineyard in search of a meal. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of ripening fruit, and the fox's stomach growled in anticipation. As the fox meandered through the vineyard, he suddenly spotted a particularly beautiful bunch of grapes hanging from a high vine. The grapes were large, plump, and a deep shade of purple, looking particularly succulent. The fox's eyes widened with excitement. He knew that if he could get his paws on those grapes, they would be a delightful treat and a perfect meal to satisfy his hunger. The fox assessed the situation quickly. The vine on which the grapes were hanging was tall and robust, its tendrils curling and twisting high above his head. The grapes were just out of his reach. Determined to obtain the delicious fruit, the fox leaped into action. With a powerful bound, he jumped towards the grapes, stretching his neck and body as far as he could. But despite his best efforts, the grapes remained tantalizingly out of reach. The fox landed on the ground, a bit shaken but undeterred. He took a moment to catch his breath and then tried again, this time with renewed energy. He sprang upwards with all his might, his muscles straining as he reached for the grapes. The vines swayed under his weight, but the grapes still eluded him. After several more attempts, the fox began to feel the strain on his limbs. His jumps grew less powerful, and his breath came in ragged gasps. With each failed attempt, the fox's frustration grew. His previously bright eyes now held a glint of irritation and weariness. He was no longer just trying to reach the grapes. He was struggling against the reality that they were simply beyond his grasp. His efforts seemed increasingly futile, and the fox's pride was beginning to take a hit. He was not accustomed to failing in his pursuits. After a particularly exhausting leap, the fox landed heavily on the ground. He looked up at the grapes once more, his face set in a scowl. The grapes, which had seemed so desirable moments ago, now appeared to mock him. Their vibrant color and inviting sheen only served to emphasize his failure. With a sigh of resignation, the fox sat down beneath the vine, staring up at the fruit with a mix of envy and disdain. In an attempt to salvage his pride, the fox muttered to himself, "These grapes are probably sour anyway. They're not worth the effort I've put in. I never really wanted them." He tried to convince himself that the grapes, which had seemed so tempting just moments before, were not worth having after all. He turned away from the vine and began to walk back through the vineyard, his head held high despite the bruised ego. As he walked away, the fox's thoughts were a mix of self-justification and lingering frustration. He told himself that he was better off without the grapes, that they were likely not as sweet as they looked. This self-deception was a way for the fox to cope with his failure and preserve his sense of dignity. In reality, he had simply been unable to reach something he desired, and his pride had led him to dismiss its value. The vineyard, now left behind, continued to thrive with its abundant grapevines, each cluster of grapes hanging high and out of reach for many.